3 minutes. That is exactly how long Mark Sterling had to wait. If he had just waited 3 more minutes before signing the divorce papers, he would have been the co-owner of a $1.3 billion real estate empire. Instead, he handed the pen back to his lawyer, looked his weeping wife in the eyes, and told her she was dead weight. He thought he was trading up for a better life. He didn't know that the woman he was discarding was the sole heiress to the very city he was trying to conquer. This is the story of Maddox Vance, the woman who lost a husband, but gained a kingdom. The radiator in apartment 4B rattled like a dying man's chest. It was a brutal January in Chicago, the kind that froze the condensation on the inside of the windows. Maddox Vance sat at the chipped Formica kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot water. They had run out of tea bags 2 days ago, and she hadn't dared to spend the $4.50 to buy a new box, not when the final notice from the electric company was glaring at her from under a magnet on the fridge. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. At 26, she looked 40. Her blonde hair, once bright and full of volume, was pulled back in a fraying, messy bun. Dark circles, purple like bruises, sat heavy under her eyes. She worked double shifts at the Greasy Spoon diner on Fifth Avenue, coming home smelling of stale frying oil and despair, only to clean the house before Mark got home. Mark! The key turned in the lock. Maddox straightened up, instinctively smoothing down her oversized sweater. She tried to smile. She always tried to smile. Mark Sterling walked in. He didn't stomp the snow off his boots. He just tracked the grey slush onto the linoleum floor Maddox had scrubbed on her hands and knees that morning. He was handsome, in a sharp, predatory way. Even when they were broke, Mark refused to look it. He wore a suit he couldn't afford, dry-cleaned with money they didn't have. He was an associate junior consultant at a mid-tier marketing firm, a title that meant he fetched coffee for rich people, but acted like he owned the building. "Hey," Maddox said softly. "I made. Well, there's soup. Canned." Mark didn't look at her. He placed his leather briefcase on the counter with a deliberate, heavy thud. The sound echoed in the small, silent room. "I'm not hungry," he said. His voice was cold. Not angry, worse. It was indifferent. "Mark, we need to talk about the electric bill," Maddox started, her voice trembling slightly. "If we don't pay $50 by Friday, they're going to cut—" "I said I'm not hungry, Maddox. Can you stop nagging me about pennies for 1 second?" He turned to face her, loosening his tie. Maddox flinched. "I'm not nagging. I'm scared. I'm picking up a 3rd shift next week, but with your car payments." "My car is necessary for my image," Mark snapped. "You don't understand business. You never have. You think small. You act small." He walked over to the table, but he didn't sit down. He stood over her, casting a shadow that swallowed her whole. He reached into his jacket pocket, the inner breast pocket, close to his heart, and pulled out a thick, folded envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the surface and hit her mug with a soft clink. "What is this?" Maddox asked, though a knot of dread was already tightening in her stomach. "Freedom," Mark said. "For both of us." Maddox opened the envelope. Her hands shook so hard she almost tore the paper. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words swam before her eyes. Irreconcilable differences. No contest. "Divorce?" she whispered. The air left the room. "Mark, we're struggling, I know, but we promised, through sickness and health, for richer or poorer." Mark let out a dry, humorless laugh. "We've done the poorer, Maddox. I'm done with it. I'm done coming home to this smell, this depression. You? Me?" Tears spilled over, hot and fast. "I work 16 hours a day to support your dreams. I paid for that suit you're wearing." "And that's the problem?" Mark sneered, leaning down, his face inches from hers. "You're a waitress, Maddox. You have no ambition. You have no pedigree. I'm moving up in the world. I'm closing deals. I'm meeting people, important people. And every time I have to mention my wife, I have to lie. I have to hide you." The cruelty of it was physically painful, like a punch to the gut. Maddox stood up, knocking her chair back. "I supported you when you failed the bar exam. Twice. I held you when your mother died. I have given you everything." "And it's not enough," Mark said, straightening his cuffs. "Look, I'm being generous. I'm taking the car debt. You keep the apartment lease. I've already paid the rent through the end of the month. You have 2 weeks to figure it out." "2 weeks?" Maddox choked out. "Where are you going?" "I'm moving in with someone who understands the future," Mark said, checking his watch. A new watch, Maddox noticed. A Rolex. A fake? Or... "Is it Jessica?" Maddox asked, the realization hitting her like a truck. Jessica Thorne, the daughter of the senior partner at his firm. Mark had mentioned her a few times, always casually. "Jessica helped me with the sprawling report. Jessica thinks I have potential." Mark didn't answer, but the slight smirk on his face was answer enough. "Sign the papers, Maddox. Don't make this messy. You can't afford a lawyer, and I've already got the best one in the city pro bono." He turned and walked toward the bedroom to pack a bag. He didn't look back at his wife, who was collapsing into the chair, the sound of her world shattering louder than the radiator's rattle. She sat there for an hour, staring at the signature line. Maddox Vance. She had taken his name, Sterling, with such pride 3 years ago. Now he was stripping it away. She grabbed a cheap ballpoint pen from the table. It was leaking ink. "Fine," she whispered to the empty freezing room. "If I'm dead weight, Mark, watch me float." She signed. The next morning was a blur of grey skies and numb movements. Mark was gone before Maddox woke up. His closet side was empty, save for a few wire hangers that chimed together like cheap wind chimes. Maddox had to go to the courthouse to file the copy. Mark, in his arrogance and haste, had left a sticky note on the counter. "Drop these off at the clerk's office by noon. I'm busy closing a merger." Even in leaving her, he was using her as his assistant. Maddox put on her only good coat, a thrifted wool trench that was 2 sizes too big, and walked the 12 blocks to the courthouse to save bus fare. The wind whipped against her face, drying the tears before they could fall. She felt hollowed out. A husk. The clerk's office was a depressing room, filled with fluorescent lights and the smell of floor wax. She waited in line for 40 minutes behind a man arguing about a parking ticket. When she finally reached the window, the clerk, a woman with cat-eye glasses and a tired expression, took the papers. "ID?" the clerk asked without looking up. Maddox slid her driver's license under the glass. The clerk stamped the documents. Thud, thud. The sound of finality. "You're processed," the clerk said. "Divorce decree will be mailed in 30 days. Next." Maddox walked out of the courthouse, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. She sat on the cold concrete steps outside, watching the busy people of Chicago rush by. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone had a purpose. She had a shift at the diner in 2 hours, and then... nothing. A blank future. "Mrs. Sterling?" The voice was deep, gravelly, and respectful. Maddox looked up. Standing in front of her was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a 1920s movie. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that cost more than Maddox's entire life earnings. He held a black umbrella to shield her from the light snow that had started to fall. "It's Vance, actually," Maddox said automatically. "Or it will be soon. Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Blackwood," the man said. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. I represent the estate of the late Silas Vance. Maddox frowned. Silas Vance? I don't know who that is. My father's name was David. He died 10 years ago. Silas Vance was your maternal grandfather, Maddox, Arthur said softly. Maddox shook her head. No, my mother was an orphan. She grew up in foster care. She never knew her parents. That is what she told you, Arthur corrected gently, and that is what she believed for a time. But the truth is more complicated. Your mother ran away from the Vance estate in Newport when she was 16. She wanted a life of art and freedom. Silas, he was a hard man. He cut her off. He erased her. But he never stopped watching. Maddox stood up, pulling her coat tighter. Look, Mr. Blackwood, I don't have money for a scam. I just signed my divorce papers 5 minutes ago. My husband left me for a rich girl. I have $12 in my bank account. If you're selling something, please just go. Arthur's expression shifted to one of profound pity. He reached into his briefcase, a sleek Italian leather case, and pulled out a file. I am not selling anything, Ms. Vance. Silas Vance passed away 3 days ago. He had no other heirs. Your mother passed 5 years ago, correct? Yes, Maddox whispered. Cancer. I am sorry, Arthur said. Silas knew. He paid for her treatment anonymously, though it was too late. When Silas died, his will was unsealed this morning. I have been trying to locate you all day. I went to your apartment, but the neighbor said you walked here. Why? Maddox asked. Arthur handed her the file. It wasn't a thin envelope like the divorce papers. It was a heavy, bound document with gold leafing on the cover. Silas Vance was the founder of Vance Global, Arthur stated. He owned 35% of the commercial real estate in downtown Chicago, plus holdings in London, Dubai, and Tokyo. Maddox stared at him. She knew the name Vance Global. Everyone did. They owned the Vance Tower, the gold building that dominated the skyline. Mark had a poster of that building in their bedroom. He called it the Pinnacle. He worshipped the ground the Vance family walked on. I don't understand, Maddox stammered. The estate is valued at approximately $1.3 billion, Arthur said, his voice lowering so the passers-by wouldn't hear. And it is all yours. The buildings, the accounts, the portfolio. You are the sole beneficiary. Maddox felt the world tilt. 1.3 billion? Yes. However, Arthur paused, looking at the courthouse doors behind her. There is a clause, a very specific clause regarding spousal privilege. Maddox's heart stopped. What clause? Silas hated fortune hunters. He knew your mother married a poor artist, and he respected that, eventually. But he was paranoid about you. The will states that the inheritance is valid only if you are unmarried at the time of transfer, or if your spouse signs a waiver of claim. If you were married without a prenuptial agreement, the estate would be held in a trust until you divorced. Arthur looked at the courthouse doors, then back at Maddox. Ms. Vance, did you just finalize a divorce? Maddox nodded, unable to speak. Is it signed? Date stamped? Yes, she breathed. 5 minutes ago. A rare, sharp smile broke across Arthur Blackwood's face. Then, Miss Vance, your timing is impeccable. If your husband had waited until tomorrow to file, or if he had stayed married to you for 1 more hour while I found you, he would have been entitled to 50% of the assets under Illinois state law. That is roughly $650 million. Maddox thought of Mark. She thought of his sneer. You act small. She thought of him leaving her for Jessica Thorne because he wanted ambition and connections. He doesn't get a dime, Maddox asked, her voice trembling. Not a penny, Arthur confirmed. He just signed away the largest settlement in the state's history. Now, Miss Vance, my car is around the corner. We have a board meeting to crash. I believe the board of directors is currently planning to sell the company to a competitor, a firm called Sterling and Thorne. Maddox's eyes widened. Sterling and Thorne? That's the firm Mark works for. That's Jessica's father's firm. Exactly, Arthur said, opening the umbrella wider to cover her completely. They think Vance Global is leaderless. They think they can buy it for scraps. They are meeting at 2:00 p.m. in the Vance Tower penthouse to finalize the hostile takeover. Maddox looked down at her thrift store coat. I can't go there. I look like a waitress. Arthur Blackwood pulled a black American Express card from his pocket, the Centurion card, heavy titanium. He handed it to her. We have 3 hours, Miss Vance. Let's go shopping. The interior of Arthur Blackwood's town car smelled of old money, mahogany, leather, and a faint hint of peppermint. Maddox sat stiffly on the heated seats, her hand still clutching the Centurion card as if it were a grenade that might explode. "Where are we going?" Maddox asked, watching the blurred city rush by through tinted windows. "Michigan Avenue," Arthur replied, tapping on a tablet. "Specifically, House of Sterling. No relation to your ex-husband, thankfully. It is the premier clothier for the executive class. If you're going to walk into a room full of sharks, Maddox, you cannot look like, well, bait," Maddox finished for him. "Precisely." The car pulled up to a curb reserved for diplomats and celebrities. The storefront was intimidating. Frosted glass, no prices in the window, and a doorman who looked like he wrestled bears for a living. Maddox hesitated as the doorman opened the car door. "Arthur, I've never bought a piece of clothing that wasn't on a clearance rack. I don't know how to be this person." Arthur stepped out and offered her his hand. "You are not pretending, Maddox. You are simply revealing what was already there. Your grandfather was the toughest negotiator I ever met. Your mother was the most resilient woman I ever knew. You have their blood. Now let's go get your armor." They walked in. The air inside was cool and smelled of jasmine. A sales associate, a tall woman with bone-straight hair and a name tag that read Sloane, looked up from a counter. Her eyes raked over Maddox's oversized, pilling thrift store coat and her scuffed boots. The judgment was instantaneous and visceral. "Deliveries are in the alley," Sloane said, not even bothering to look Maddox in the eye. "We don't give handouts here." Maddox shrank back, the old instinct to apologize rising in her throat. But then she remembered Mark's voice. "You act small." Arthur stepped forward, his cane clicking sharply on the marble floor. "We are not here for a handout, Sloane. We are here to close the store," Sloane scoffed. "Excuse me? Who are you?" Arthur placed the titanium card on the glass counter. It made a heavy metallic sound. "I am Arthur Blackwood, legal counsel for the Vance estate. And this," he gestured to Maddox, "is the new owner of this building. You lease this space from Vance Global, do you not? I believe your lease is up for renewal next month." Sloane's face went pale. The color drained so fast she looked like she might faint. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." "We need a wardrobe," Maddox said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. She stepped forward, shedding the heavy coat and letting it fall to the floor. "For a board meeting, today, I need to look like I own the place. Because I do." For the next hour, the boutique became a whirlwind. Arthur sat in a velvet armchair, sipping espresso, while 3 assistants scurried around Maddox. They pulled dresses, but Maddox shook her head. "No dresses," she said, looking at herself in the 3-way mirror. "I don't want to look pretty. I want to look dangerous." She chose a suit. It was Italian silk, tailored to perfection, in a deep, blood-red crimson. The trousers were wide-legged and high-waisted, creating a silhouette that was both feminine and commanding. The blazer was sharp enough to cut glass. Underneath, she wore a simple black silk camisole. A stylist was brought in from a salon next door. They washed the diner grease out of her hair, blowing it out into sleek, golden waves that cascaded over her shoulders. They concealed the dark circles under her eyes, applied a sharp winged liner, and painted her lips a matte ruby red that matched the suit. When Maddox finally stepped out of the dressing room, silence fell over the shop. She didn't look like the tired waitress from The Greasy Spoon. She looked like a queen who had just ascended the throne. She stood taller. The suit forced her posture to correct itself. She couldn't slouch in $5,000 tailoring. Arthur stood up slowly. He nodded, a small, proud smile touching his lips. "Your grandfather would have been terrified of you," he said. "It's perfect." "How much?" Maddox asked, looking at the tag. "It doesn't matter," Arthur said. "But for the record, the outfit, the shoes, Louboutin, naturally, and the bag come to roughly $12,000. Maddox felt dizzy. "That's my salary for a year." "That is pocket change for you now," Arthur corrected. He checked his pocket watch. 1:45 p.m. The meeting starts in 15 minutes. Mark Sterling thinks he is about to become a partner by handing Vance Global over to the Thorns. He thinks he's the hunter. Maddox looked in the mirror one last time. She saw the ghost of the girl who cried over a $50 electric bill. She bid her goodbye. "Let's go," Maddox said, grabbing the black leather briefcase Arthur had bought for her. "I have a merger to stop." Vance Tower pierced the Chicago clouds, a golden needle in a haystack of steel. The elevator ride to the 90th floor was silent and ear-poppingly fast. Maddox watched the floor numbers tick up. 70, 80, 85. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her face was a mask of icy calm. Arthur stood beside her, his presence a grounding force. "Remember," Arthur said as the elevator slowed, "you don't need to shout to be heard. You have the leverage. You have the shares. They are trespassing in your house." "Does Mark know I'm coming?" "No one knows," Arthur said. "The board believes the seat of the chairman is empty. They are vultures circling a carcass." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. They stepped onto plush carpet that cost more per square foot than Maddox's apartment rent. The reception area was empty. The receptionist was likely dismissed for the confidential meeting. Double mahogany doors stood at the end of the hall. Voices drifted through them. Maddox recognized his voice instantly. "Sentimental value is irrelevant," Mark was saying. He sounded confident, arrogant. "Vance Global has been stagnant since the old man got sick. The portfolio is ripe for liquidation. Sterling and Thorne can strip the assets, sell off the residential blocks, and redevelop the commercial spaces into luxury condos. The ROI would be 40% in the first quarter." "And the legacy tenants?" another voice asked. A woman. Jessica Thorne. Her voice was like syrup laced with arsenic. "The non-profits Silas Vance supported?" "Evict them," Mark said smoothly. "Business is business, Jessica. You know that better than anyone." Maddox felt a surge of pure, cold rage. Silas Vance had rented space to charities for $1 a year. Mark wanted to kick them out to build condos for millionaires. She looked at Arthur. He nodded. Arthur reached out and pushed the double doors open. They swung wide with a heavy swoosh. The room froze. It was a massive oval table surrounded by 20 people. At the head of the table sat an empty chair. Silas's chair. To the right of it stood Mark, pointing at a projection screen full of graphs. Next to him sat Jessica, a brunette with sharp features, wearing a grey suit that looked dull compared to Maddox's crimson armor. At the far end sat Reginald Thorne, Jessica's father, a heavy-set man with a cigar in his hand. Mark stopped mid-sentence. He turned, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption. "Excuse me, this is a closed session," Mark started, blinking. Then he really looked. He squinted. The woman standing in the doorway was tall, radiant, glowing with power and wealth. The red suit blazed against the dark wood of the boardroom. But the eyes, blue, piercing, familiar. "Maddox?" Mark whispered. The remote control slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Jessica Thorne looked from Mark to Maddox, her lip curling. "Mark, who is this?" Maddox walked into the room. The sound of her red-bottomed heels on the parquet floor was like a metronome counting down their doom. Click, click, click. She didn't stop until she reached the head of the table, the empty chair. She placed her briefcase on the table, right on top of Mark's notes. "I'm his wife," Maddox said, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. She paused, looking Mark dead in the eye. "Correction, his ex-wife, as of 3 hours ago." "Maddox, what are you doing here?" Mark hissed, his face flushing red. He looked around nervously at the board members. "Security, how did she get in? She's a waitress. She's trespassing." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Arthur Blackwood's voice boomed from the doorway. He walked in slowly. "And show some respect to the majority shareholder." Reginald Thorne stood up, dropping his cigar. "Blackwood? What is the meaning of this? Silas is dead. The estate is in probate." "The probate was expedited," Arthur said, taking a seat next to Maddox. "Silas Vance left 100% of his assets, voting rights and real estate holdings to his only living relative." "His granddaughter?" Arthur gestured to Maddox. "Gentlemen and Ms. Thorne," Arthur announced. "Meet Maddox Vance, the owner of this building and the woman you were planning to liquidate." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Mark looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Granddaughter," Mark choked out. You're an orphan. You told me you were an orphan." "I didn't know," Maddox said coldly, "and apparently you didn't check. You were too busy trying to find a woman with ambition, weren't you, Mark?" Jessica Thorne stood up, her eyes narrowing. "This is ridiculous. Even if she is the heir, she doesn't know anything about business. We have a tender offer on the table. The board has already voted preliminarily to accept the buyout from Sterling and Thorne." Maddox turned her gaze to Jessica. Up close, she saw the heavy makeup, the insecurity in Jessica's posture. "I may not know how to strip mine a company for parts," Maddox said, "but I know how to read a balance sheet, and I know a bad deal when I see one." She opened the folder Arthur had prepared. "You're offering $60 a share," Maddox said, glancing at the paper. "Vance Global's assets alone are worth $95 a share. You're trying to rob this company blind because you thought no one was watching. Well, I'm watching it now." "We can negotiate," Reginald Thorne said, sweating now. "We can raise the offer to 70. "There will be no negotiation," Maddox said, "because Vance Global is not for sale, especially not to the man who wrecked my home." She looked at Mark. He was trembling. The realization was dawning on him. $1.3 billion, and he had walked away from it this morning for a used car and a promotion. "Maddox," Mark said, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. He took a step toward her. "Maddox, baby, listen. I didn't mean those things I said. I was stressed. The merger. It was pressure from the firm. I love you. We can fix this." The room watched, fascinated. This was better than any corporate drama. "Fix this," Maddox raised an eyebrow. Mark, you served me divorce papers yesterday. You called me dead weight. I was confused, Mark pleaded. He reached for her hand. We're still married in the eyes of God, Maddox. The papers, maybe they haven't been processed yet. If we're still married. Arthur Blackwood cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I personally walked the decree to the judge. Since you requested an expedited, uncontested divorce, it was finalized at 11:00 a.m. You are legally single. And, Arthur added, delivering the final blow, Miss Vance's inheritance triggered at 11:05 a.m., 5 minutes after you were no longer her husband, which means you have absolutely no claim to the Vance fortune. Mark fell back into his chair, looking physically ill. Jessica Thorne stared at Mark with disgust. "You idiot!" she hissed. "You told me you had handled her. You told me she was a nobody." I, Mark stammered. Maddox stood up. "Mr. Thorne," she said to the senior partner, "I am reviewing the list of external consultants Vance Global employs. I see Sterling and Thorne is on a retainer for marketing services, worth about $2 million a year." Yes. We have a long-standing relationship," Reginald said, trying to salvage the situation. "You're fired," Maddox said simply. You can't do that," Reginald sputtered. "I just did. Security." Maddox raised her voice. 2 uniformed guards entered the room. "Please escort Mr. Sterling and the Thorne family out of my building," Maddox commanded, "and revoke their security clearances, immediately." "Maddox, please!" Mark shouted as the guard grabbed his arm. "I can explain. I love you. Don't do this." Maddox didn't even look at him. She turned her chair, Silas's chair, and sat down at the head of the table. She looked at the remaining board members, who were terrified. "Now," Maddox said, smoothing the lapel of her crimson suit, "let's talk about the charity leases. I want them extended for another 10 years. As Mark was dragged out of the room, screaming her name, Maddox Vance didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like the CEO of her own life. But the war wasn't over. Mark Sterling was a desperate man, and desperate men did dangerous things. 2 weeks had passed since the boardroom coup, and Maddox Vance had learned that money could buy silence, but it couldn't buy peace. She sat in the penthouse of the Vance Tower, her new home. It was a sprawling, glass-walled palace in the sky, filled with modern art she didn't understand and furniture that was too white to sit on comfortably. Below her, Chicago twinkled like a bed of diamonds. On the massive television screen, Mark Sterling's face was zoomed in, high definition and tragic. He was sitting across from a famous talk show host, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "She lied to me, Oprah," Mark said, his voice cracking perfectly. "I worked myself to the bone. I took public transport. I ate ramen noodles while she sat on a secret fortune. I didn't leave her because of money. I left because the trust was broken. And now she throws me out on the street like garbage after I gave her the best years of my life." Maddox threw the remote control at the screen. It bounced off the wall with a clatter. "He is lying!" she screamed to the empty room. "He left me for a promotion. He called me a burden." Arthur Blackwood entered the room, his demeanor calm as always, though his face was graver than usual. He carried a tablet. "The public loves a victim, Maddox," Arthur said gently. "And unfortunately, Mr. Sterling is very telegenic. The hashtags #Gadshash Justice for Mark and #Gadshash Gold Digger Maddox are trending on Twitter." "This is insane." Maddox paced the floor, her silk robe trailing behind her. He signed the papers. "It's over." "It's not over," Arthur corrected. "He has filed a lawsuit this morning. He is suing for marital fraud. He claims you knew about the inheritance during the marriage and concealed it to deny him his marital share. He's asking for $500 million. I didn't know, Maddox shouted. You know I didn't know. I know, Arthur said, but the burden of proof is on us, and he has the backing of the Thorns. Reginald Thorne is funding Mark's legal team. They are using Mark as a battering ram to force you to settle or sell the company to them. Maddox sank onto the white sofa, putting her head in her hands. The loneliness was crushing. A month ago, her biggest worry was the electric bill. Now, half the country hated her, and her ex-husband was trying to destroy her life for a payday. What do we do? She whispered. We fight, Arthur said, but not in the mud. We don't go on talk shows. We show them who you are. The Vance Winter Gala is in 3 days. It was your grandfather's favorite event. All of Chicago's elite will be there. The press will be there. You need to stand up, look them in the eye, and show them you are not a fraud. Mark will be there, Maddox said, a cold knot forming in her stomach. If Reginald is funding him, he'll bring Mark. Let him come. Arthur's eyes hardened. Let him see what he threw away. But Maddox, you must be careful. Desperation makes men dangerous. Mark isn't just greedy anymore. He's humiliated. That is a volatile combination. That night, Maddox couldn't sleep. The penthouse felt too big. She wandered the halls, eventually stopping in the library. She pulled a book from the shelf, a photo album of her grandfather, Silas. He looked stern, unyielding. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. It was a text from an unknown number. Nice view from up there. Don't get too comfortable. Gravity is a bitch. Attached was a photo taken from the street, zoomed in on her penthouse balcony. A silhouette of a figure standing in the window. Her. Someone was watching. Maddox dropped the phone, her breath hitching. She ran to the window and looked down at the streets far below. Nothing but traffic and darkness. But she felt it. The eyes on her. Mark wasn't just suing her. He was hunting her. The night of the Vance Winter Gala, the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was transformed into a winter wonderland. Icicle chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and white roses covered every surface. It was a display of obscene wealth, exactly the kind of thing Maddox used to roll her eyes at. Now she was footing the bill. She wore a gown of liquid gold, a nod to the Vance Tower. It clung to her curves and pooled around her feet. Around her neck hung the Vance star, a sapphire necklace worth more than the entire neighborhood she used to live in. Chin up, Arthur whispered as the doors opened. Don't let them see you bleed. Maddox stepped into the light. Hundreds of cameras flashed simultaneously, blinding her. She forced a smile, the muscle memory from her waitress days kicking in. The customer is always right. Smile. She navigated the room, shaking hands with senators, investors, and socialites. They smiled at her face, but she heard the whispers as she passed. That's her. The secret heiress. I heard she planned the divorce for months. Poor Mark. Maddox gritted her teeth and kept moving. She needed fresh air. She signaled to her security detail, 2 ex-military guards named Cole and Davis, that she was going to the VIP balcony. The balcony was empty and cold, a relief from the stifling heat of the ballroom. Maddox leaned against the stone railing, taking a deep breath of the icy Chicago air. You look expensive. The voice came from the shadows. Maddox spun around. Mark stepped out from behind a pillar. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp suit. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned. He held a glass of scotch that looked like it wasn't his first. How did you get past security? Maddox demanded, stepping back. Jessica got me a staff pass. Mark smirked, taking a swig of the drink. It's amazing what doors open when you're the wronged husband. Get out, Mark. before I have you arrested." "Arrested?" Mark laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "For what? Talking to my wife?" "Ex-wife." Mark moved closer, invading her space. He smelled of alcohol and expensive cologne, a scent that used to comfort her. Now it made her nauseous. "You know, I've been thinking," Mark slurred slightly. 500 million is a lot of money. The lawyers say it'll take years to get it. Years of court. Years of your name being dragged through the mud. We could end it tonight, Maddox. "What do you want?" "Take me back," Mark whispered, his mood swinging instantly from aggressive to pathetic. He reached out to touch her arm. "We were good together, Elle. Remember? Pizza nights, the way you rubbed my back. I made a mistake. I was scared. The money, it doesn't have to divide us. It can be ours." Maddox looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the greed in his eyes. He didn't want her. He wanted the access. He wanted the golden ticket. "You didn't love me when we were poor, Mark," Maddox said, her voice shaking with repressed anger. "You certainly don't love me now. You just love the reflection of yourself you see in my bank account." Mark's face twisted. The pathetic mask dropped, replaced by pure malice. He grabbed her wrist, hard. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed. "You're nothing. You're a waitress in a borrowed dress. You think these people respect you? They're laughing at you. I'm the only one who knows who you really are. A nobody." "Let go of me." Maddox struggled, but his grip was iron. "I'm going to ruin you," Mark growled, pulling her closer to the railing. The drop was 4 stories down to the concrete courtyard. "I'll tell them you abused me. I'll tell them you're unstable. I'll make sure you never enjoy a cent of that money. Let her go." The voice was sharp, female, and commanded instant obedience. Jessica Thorne stood at the balcony door, but she wasn't alone. She was with Reginald Thorne and, surprisingly, Arthur Blackwood. Mark froze but didn't release Maddox's wrist. "Jessica, we're just talking." "You're drunk, Mark," Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And you're making a scene. This isn't part of the plan." "The plan?" Maddox wrenched her arm free, rubbing the red marks on her wrist. She looked from Mark to Jessica. "The plan was to sue her, you idiot," Jessica snapped. "Not assault her at a public gala where there are cameras everywhere." She pointed to the corner of the balcony. A security camera blinked red. Mark paled. He looked at the camera, then back at Maddox. I didn't—" "Mr. Sterling," Arthur Blackwood stepped forward. "That footage is already being uploaded to a secure server. If you do not leave this building immediately and drop your lawsuit by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I will release the video of you threatening Ms. Vance's life to the police. Attempted extortion and assault. You'll be disbarred and in prison before lunch." Mark looked at Reginald Thorne for help. "Reggie, you said you'd back me?" Reginald Thorne lit a cigar, not even looking at Mark. "I back winners, Mark. Tonight you look like a liability. Go home." Mark looked at Maddox one last time. His eyes held no love, only a bottomless, consuming hatred. He turned and stumbled away, vanishing into the party. Maddox let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, and slumped against the railing. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked, moving to her side. "I'm fine," Maddox said, though she was trembling. She looked at the Thorns. "Why did you help me?" "You want my company." "We do," Jessica said, coolly, stepping into the light. She looked Maddox up and down. "And we will get it. But we'll get it through business, not by backing a drunk abuser. It's bad for the brand." "Besides," Reginald added, puffing on his cigar, "we have a new proposition for you, Miss Vance. Since you clearly aren't going to sell—" "I'm not," Maddox said firmly. "Then we compete," Reginald grinned, a shark-like expression. But be warned, the real estate market is much colder than this balcony. Mark was a nuisance. We are the hurricane." The Thorns turned and left. Arthur put his jacket around Maddox's shoulders. "You handled that well." "I didn't do anything," Maddox said bitterly. "I just stood there." "Standing your ground is doing something," Arthur said. "But Reginald is right. Mark is done. But the Thorns are just getting started. They're going to try to starve Vance Global of capital. They're going to squeeze us." Maddox looked out at the city lights. She touched the red marks on her wrist. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Let them try," Maddox whispered. "I'm done being the waitress. I'm done being the victim. Arthur, cancel my meetings for tomorrow." "Why?" "Because," Maddox turned, her eyes blazing, "I'm going to visit the one person who knows how to fight a war like this." "Who?" "My father's old journals," Maddox said. "And I'm going to buy Sterling and Thorn." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Buy them?" "Maddox, that would cost billions. We don't have that kind of liquid cash." "Not yet," Maddox smiled, a dangerous, terrifying smile. "But I know something Mark told me once about Reginald's offshore accounts, a rumor. If it's true, I don't need billions. I just need a good investigator." The game had changed. Maddox wasn't just defending her kingdom anymore. She was going to conquer theirs. 3 months later, the landscape of Chicago real estate had shifted tectonically. Maddox sat in the office of Reginald Thorn. It wasn't his office anymore. The nameplate on the door now read, "Vance and Partners." Reginald sat on the other side of the desk, sweating profusely. The air conditioning was on full blast, but it couldn't cool the heat of the federal indictment lying on the desk between them. "You can't prove I knew about the Cayman accounts," Reginald stammered. That was an accounting error." "An error involving $40 million of embezzled client funds?" Maddox asked, flipping through the dossier. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "The SEC calls that fraud, Reginald. My investigators call it leverage." Maddox had spent the last 90 days not sleeping. She had hired a forensic accounting firm, the same one used to audit the Enron collapse, to tear Sterling and Thorn apart from the inside out. Mark's drunk ramblings on the balcony about offshore accounts had been the loose thread. Maddox had pulled it, and the whole sweater had unraveled. "What do you want?" Reginald defeatedly slumped in his chair. "You have the evidence. You can send me to prison." "I don't want to send you to prison," Maddox said, closing the file. "That's bad for property values. I want your firm. I want your client list. And I want the deed to the Thorn building on Wacker Drive." Reginald's eyes bulged. That's my family legacy." "And Vance Global was mine," Maddox said softly. "You tried to steal it. Consider this a hostile acquisition." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A purchase agreement. Price, $1. "Sign it," Maddox commanded, "and I lose the evidence. Don't sign it, and I call the feds." Reginald's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at Jessica, who was standing in the corner, arms crossed. She didn't look at her father. She looked at Maddox with begrudging respect. He signed. As the Thorns vacated the building, carrying boxes of their personal effects, Maddox stood by the window. She had done it. She had not only saved her grandfather's empire, she had doubled it. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Maddox said. The door opened, and Mark Sterling walked in. He looked different. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap polyester blend that didn't fit right. He looked thinner, older. He held a resume in his hands. "Maddox," he said, his voice humble, almost unrecognizable. "Mr. Sterling." Maddox didn't turn around. You have an appointment. I heard you were hiring, Mark said, stepping into the room. For the new acquisition. I know the accounts, Maddox. I know the clients better than anyone. I can help you transition. Maddox finally turned. She looked at the man she had washed socks for, the man she had starved for, the man who had discarded her like trash. You want a job? She asked. I need a job, Mark admitted, looking at the floor. No one in the city will hire me, not after the gala video leaked. I'm broke, Elle. I'm living in a studio in the suburbs. Maddox walked over to him. She took the resume from his hands. She glanced at it. Associate Junior Consultant. She looked him in the eye. For a moment, Mark saw a flicker of the old Maddox, the soft, loving wife. He smiled, a glimmer of hope rising in his chest. Please, he whispered. Just a chance. Maddox walked to the shredder by the desk. She fed the resume into the machine. They both watched as the paper was sliced into confetti. Zizd. I'm sorry, Mark, Maddox said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. But we're looking for candidates with integrity. You're overqualified in betrayal, but underqualified in loyalty. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. Security, escort Mr. Sterling out and ensure he is banned from all Vance properties. Permanently. Maddox, wait! Mark reached out, but the guards were already there. They grabbed him by the arms. As they dragged him away, he didn't scream this time. He just wept. He realized finally that the dead weight he had cut loose was the only thing that had been keeping him afloat. When the door closed, Arthur Blackwood stepped out from the adjoining room. He was holding a glass of champagne. Ruthless, Arthur noted. Silas would be proud. It was necessary, Maddox sighed, taking the glass. Is it over, Arthur? Can I rest now? Arthur smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second envelope, one Maddox had never seen before. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with a crest that looked suspiciously like the emblem of the Rockefeller family. Not quite, my dear, Arthur said. You see, Silas didn't just own real estate. He was a silent partner in a trust established in 1912. The Vance Global portfolio you just fought for. That was just the test. Maddox stared at the envelope. The test? Silas stipulated that you could only inherit the true trust if you proved you could defend the initial assets for 90 days without selling out, Arthur explained. You just passed. What's in the true trust? Maddox asked, her hand trembling as she took the envelope. Arthur clinked his glass against hers. The other 90% of the fortune, he whispered, and a seat on the council. Welcome to the real world, Maddox. Maddox looked at the envelope, then out at the endless skyline of Chicago. She thought of the radiator that rattled in apartment 4B. She thought of the $50 electric bill. She broke the seal. The game had just begun. And that is the story of how Maddox Vance turned a divorce decree into a dynasty. Mark Sterling thought he was signing away a burden, but he was actually signing away his destiny. He learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the person who supports you when you have nothing, because they are the only ones who deserve to stand next to you when you have everything. What do you think? Was Maddox too harsh on Mark at the end, or did he get exactly what he deserved? And what do you think is inside that Rockefeller envelope? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We release new real-life dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you discard. They might just be the queen in disguise. See you next time.